Okay, I'm Martin Krzywinski. I work at Michael Smith Genome Sciences Center in Vancouver, Canada. I am in this line of work rather accidentally. My training is in physics and math and some biochemistry. And I work at the Genome Center because I was hired there as a system administrator when they first started, and I thought there would be an interesting thing to do, just as Linux was taking off. And I'm still there, and I've done different things while I was there, but there's enough stuff going on that things are very interesting all the time. Yeah, so there's one that stands out, which was interesting because of the decisions that we needed to make to put it together, and it was entered into the National Science Foundation Visualization Challenge, and it did pretty well in it. And it was a poster that depicted the deadly genomes of viruses and bacteria, so the things that can kill you. But it started completely different. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see what a genome looks like? Because we work with genomes and we just see sequence. So what about an artistic representation of the genome? What about something that captures whatever I think the essence of the genome is, with some artistic license, but that is still quantitative? And I thought, well, why don't we first map it onto pixels in an image, and so we can get really dense representation. It turned out that looked really boring, and it looked like noise, and it wasn't very artistic. So I stumbled upon this idea of turning the genome into a path which curved around based on repeat content and things like this. And I thought, okay, this is great. But the human genome is too big to do this. It would take forever. I thought doing the chromosomes. And a friend of mine said, why don't you do bacteria? Oh, but this is great. The genomes are small, so let's do bacteria. But which bacteria? And someone else said, well, why don't you just do the stuff that kills you? And I thought, oh, this is an excellent idea because there's some tension in this concept. It's all the things we're scared of. And there are some really great contrasts. Malaria has a really large genome. Ebola has a really tiny genome. And, we're very scared of Ebola, and it's very tiny on the poster. So the poster winds up having these depictions of the paths of genomes overlaid with some epidemiological information. It winds up being kind of an interpretive piece. So I like how it changed from our initial idea, oh, let's see what a genome looks like, to refining the concept so that the image is interesting and the topic is interesting and it catches you because it's got the word deadly in the title. I know, it's intriguing.
All right.
Data visualization bypasses the mathematics a little bit. So in that I can show quantities without showing numbers. That takes some of the fear out of the experience for people who are mathophobes or have bad experience with mathematics. That also lets me borrow some of the innate skills we have in relating shapes and sizes and colors to help people see proportions without having them to understand things like ratios and I can show change without them having to understand calculus because they're used to it looking at relating visual things because we live in a visual world. So that still requires that they understand what they're looking at, that they understand how to interpret proportions, and that they understand their own biases when they are looking at things, so that they're not fixating on a particular area of the graphic or of change, that they can understand that it's difficult to distinguish randomness from patterns. That's something that data literacy isn't just about knowing some math and knowing how to look at a scatter plot. It's knowing some of the biases that you have inside you that make interpreting data difficult, such as how do I distinguish patterns from random data? How do I even think about the concept of randomness? So signal and noise are things that are critically important in uncertainty. That in some way uncertainty is noise. So uncertainty, one thing is how do I show uncertainty? How do I extract significance, whatever that may mean, from this view? So is data literacy improving? I hope so. because we have more data. So I hope that people are exposed to it more and therefore somehow pick up the skills to be looking at it. The thing is that depending on where you're doing this activity, people are very confused because that's what science is about. It's about some amount of confusion and handling this confusion. So the people who are looking at the data don't quite know how to interpret it and quite how to show it. That's what research is about, because those answers are still they're still out there for us to find. So those kinds of figures are very difficult to interpret. You need to be quite plugged in. But the kinds of things that you see in popular science magazines, newspapers, the New York Times, for example, really help people get it, because they do a very good job. And I think that I hope people are getting better at it, although some media outlets don't report even proportions value or risk. So now I don't have the numbers of whether people are getting better or not. I hope they are, but maybe that's just a hope. Okay, well, so the travesty of science is bad communication. Well, I think that the travesty of science is bad science. The travesty of science is intellectual dishonesty. It's faking data. It's misrepresenting information. That's the travesty. You can communicate both facts and lies well and poorly. So in some way, communication is an independent axis of the scientific effort now. It's unfortunate that science, when science is communicated poorly, it is unfortunate because the results that it offers us are very complicated, and we have to work very, very hard to understand what the experiment is telling us already, because we are studying complex things. So now when we overlay complexity due to the communication, now we have something that's 4 times as complicated if it goes as the square. So now, I'm not doing anybody any favors, nor am I doing myself any favor if I obfuscate my results, my insight, or that makes it sound like I'm doing it on purpose, or if I don't try my darnest to make it as clear as possible. So, a tragedy in science is that scientists are not well trained or used to talking to people outside of their immediate sphere of knowledge. So this means that as the person's background and familiarity with your field grows more distant from you, you need to change your language, you need to change your concept, you need to change your analogies. You need to have these so-called spherical cow approximations, right, where I can tell you in the simplest way the essence of my work. Yes, I'm going to be leaving out detail. Yes, I'm going to be saying things that are not entirely true, but that is the case at all levels of science. At no point in time are we completely representing the reality perfectly well, because that's a philosophical question of what is reality. Our models are improving. So even amongst ourselves, we are approximating. And yet, when it comes to the public, we're worried that these approximations might be seen as oversimplification or as misinterpretation. So the public's job is then to understand what the scientist is doing. The public has to understand that they can't understand the jargon, that they can't understand the model. So what's being told to them is a really good way to get started, or the bare essentials. And that does not represent all that we know, and that as science goes, it might change. Particularly some of the groundbreaking stuff, observation science and biology. It's unlikely that the mass of the electron is going to change tomorrow. We probably have that down right. But driver mutations in cancer, who knows? Maybe we'll find one tomorrow that we didn't know about, and we'll have to revise some of our ideas of how cancer starts. So, the public should be ready and be happy when science changes its minds and the story changes, because that is the essence of it. Well, what works, what doesn't, depends who your audience is, and it depends on your end goal. I've been accused of making things look too simple and throwing things away and chasing the aesthetic, and that's fine. I'm happy to be accused of that, because then I've achieved the purpose in that project. But of course, you don't want that to be your end sole goal, unless you're an artist, in which it's great. I've made some pictures of pi or other numbers, and I was doing some math art and math humor with circles, and I was representing numbers artistically, and nobody said, oh, you're misrepresenting pi by showing some colors. It's because they knew that it's an abstract representation. Biologists tend to have a really fixed view on their systems and the desire to maintain the full complexity in their systems at all times. No matter how they're being shown, you can't simplify biology. It's complex. That's why it's biology. That's why we love it. Well, yes, but why don't we try? See what happens. What is the essence of biology? I'm reminded of these little animal drawings that Picasso did. There's a single line. There's a wiener dog, an owl, a flamingo. I think there's a horse, and yeah, it's of course simplifying the horse. It's a single stroke horse. It's a single, and it makes you think about aspects of the horse that maybe you didn't think about before. And nobody's saying that is the horse. That's just an artifact. Everything is an artifact, and some artifacts are more detailed than others. But let's not think that the only way we can represent a biological system is by looking at the sequence. That's in some way getting at the underlying rule set for that biological object, but there's still more than that. What about the environment? What about the epigenetics? What about all the other stuff? So you can always say there's not enough detail in this description. The point is, how do you make data beautiful? I think that comes down to the individual artist. The beauty is there are objective aspects of what people find attractive. But then there's also the personal expression. This is what I like to see, and this is what I create, and this is how I express myself. And you may like it or you may not, like any other artist. And an artist might find their followers, and some artists might find more followers or fewer followers. And they have their aesthetic, and that's kind of a personality, an on-page personality, And then you can look at it and maybe you can get some insight into what they were thinking, and there's some kind of a process. So my approach is to keep working at it until I no longer think it's ugly. I don't quite know how to make it beautiful, but I know when it's still ugly to me, and I just keep plugging away at it until that sense stops. The people who don't believe there's genetic code in our cells, so there's nothing you can do. There's truly nothing you can do for those people, because they do not have the same knowledge, theory of knowledge in their heads that we do. They obtain their information from another source, presumably from an authoritative text that they see as valuable and as correct as our scientific texts, and there's nothing you can do. There's no amount of science, there's no amount of observation, there's no amount of discussion that you can have, because we do not share the same value system. They do not put any value on evidence and on observation. They put value on authority. And we don't put any value on authority. We only put value on observation and evidence. Anyone can say something that is either brilliant or wrong. You're not assured by the speaker of one or the other, whereas they are. So it's a very sad fact. It's really unfortunate. And it's not because it's unfortunate because they don't believe we have genetic material, but what that leads to and what that belief system causes, other opinions that come together with that are bad for other people around them. So that's hard. Now with Darwin's figure, I like that example and I use it because in his notes, there's a page of his notes that's popular, and it says "I think" at the top. Yeah, he just says "I think," and then he draws a little tree, and this idea that I think this picture is a powerful idea. It's pretty simple, but you think in pictures, in geometrical shapes. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but this is how he thought, or maybe this is what the note suggests. And so there is real value in choosing a visual representation that gets us closer to the proportions and to the differences that are important to us. And what are those encodings and what are those visual representations? And it's not always clear what those are. So it was good data viz. He drew it by hand. So if you imagine that there is a detail knob, when the knob is turned to high, you get raw data. When the knob is turned to low, you get a yes or no answer. And data visualization, the knob is still on pretty high. You're still close to the data set. And there may be multi-dimensional aspects of the data set that are being shown. So what do I mean by that? Categories, samples, tissues, organisms, whatever. It's not just a single scale. And that there are patterns that are shown to you and demonstrated to be of value to note and explained why they are valuable. So it's an interpretive walk through the forest. That's a data viz. You're seeing the trees. Somebody's telling you what the trees mean, and you get to touch the tree. I mean, you can't really touch raw data, but okay. Infographics, I think everybody has different definitions, but to me, the knob of detail is turned much lower. There is some remnant of quantity, but there is a lot more ink on the page and a lot less quantity. There is image flourish, there is some kind of impact of shapes, but the amount of information is low. Not necessarily, though. There are some really beautiful depictions of structures and spaces. For example, a really detailed view of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Exploded different components. That would be an information graphic. That's not data viz, unless you see the Boeing as a three-dimensional surface of data, right? That's an infographic, and that would be really great. There aren't quantities necessarily in that because you're just showing shapes. So there's great value in that. I don't think there is a lot of value in just showing three numbers with different sized spheres saying how much coffee people drink around the world. You can just tell it to me in a sentence. But I think they're all useful. They're part of the really large conversation and things people create. And I can't make stuff out of my sense of aesthetic and feel like somebody else's sense of aesthetic is objectively wrong. Nobody's aesthetic is objectively wrong. That's their expression. And we see what's most useful and what remains, and what spawns off new ideas. So it's kind of an evolution of sorts. I am reminded of this video. I think it's called Powers of 10. That may not be the name, but it starts off with a couple. It's really old. I think it's pretty dated. It's 1970s, and it's a couple having a picnic, and you're seeing them from a bird's eye view, and then I think it zooms into their atoms through this kind of animation, and you walk through the magnitudes of 10 until you get to, 10 to the minus 10, whatever. I don't know if it went down to proton scale or it went down to atom scale, but it went down to minus 10 to minus 15 meters. And then it zoomed out past the couple and into the universe. And there was this spectacular display of proportion, which I think people lack an intuition for, of the differences in quantities and their sizes. And this also relates to their ability to apply their intuition at different length scales and time scales. We have no intuition at different length scales and time scales. There's another really great video that comes to mind that compares the size of stars. And it's quite ominous because you see these stars lined up on a shelf, and the image keeps zooming out as bigger and bigger stars come into view and as smaller and smaller stars fade away. And the music is very ponderous and very dramatic. And you think that at some point these stars can't get any bigger because you've seen the sun 2 minutes ago and it's really faded away. And no, these stars keep getting bigger. And then you realize, wow, my experience of the universe is zero. There are things out there that are impossible to wrap your head around. And the idea that we have discovered their presence and somehow measured their characteristics is wonderful. And then somebody's made a video out of this, and now I'm having an emotional reaction to this scientific observation. It's really great.